Hi, I'm Lucy. I'm at Spitfire, and today I'm going to talk a bit about writing music for video games and some specific techniques that you can apply to making music for games and interactive media. This is sort of in honour of Spitfire's latest instrument release, Ronroco, which was made with Gustavo Santaolalla, who is the incredible composer for the Last of Us game series, which is one of my favourite games, and I'm so excited to talk to you about some of the fundamentals of game composition and also show you the instrument and do a bit of a deep dive. I'm going to take you on a bit of a whistle-stop tour of some of the fundamentals of scoring for games, and we'll first look at what sets game music apart from film music and music for linear media. Then we're going to look at writing effective loops. We're going to look at writing horizontally and then writing vertically. And we're going to touch on implementation, so the technical processes behind how music gets into games and how that affects your composition and how you can compose to support implementation. And finally, we're going to look at what makes a great game soundtrack, and we're going to touch on a few standout soundtracks, some of my favourite game scores, and what makes them great. So that's a lot to dive into. Let's go. What distinguishes game music from film music? At its core, the key difference is interactivity versus linearity. So films, as we know, offer a completely linear narrative. You're working with fixed, pre-directed scenes and you're scoring to specific moments. So you have tightly synced cues and exact hit points as a composer. The emotional arc is predetermined and your music is supporting a predefined journey, and you may have sat down with the director in a spotting session and worked out exactly where the music's going in relation to the story. In contrast, games are interactive and the player is controlling the pacing, the direction, sometimes even the outcome of the story. Now, obviously, this varies hugely game to game. There's so many different kinds of game, just as there are different genres of film, there's a plethora of genres of game. But in all cases, the music is generally very adaptive and it's often built in these sort of modular sections, which are implemented, and these might loop, they might transition into each other seamlessly depending on what the player is doing. So the music has to be written in these chunks that can be implemented. You're going to hear that word a lot in this video, and we'll unpack what that means more soon. And we'll also unpack what horizontal and vertical mean in this context shortly. So because the gameplay experience is very fluid and player-driven, the composer isn't just scoring a single scene. Sometimes you are. Sometimes you're scoring to what you may know as cinematics or cutscenes, which kind of resemble little movies within the game, and they're moments that aren't so interactive. But most of the time, you're designing a sort of system of music that can respond to a wide range of potential scenarios. So in that sense, game music is less about scoring a moment and more about sculpting an emotional environment that a player can inhabit and influence, or both at the same time. So let's get into the actual music. To help explain everything and to demonstrate these concepts, I have created an imaginary game, a fake game that doesn't exist, but it will in our minds during this video. Picture this. You are a young moth. You are a moth and you are hatching from the cocoon and you are venturing into the world for the very first time, and you're stretching your wings for the first time, you're flying for the first time, you're fluttering around, you're searching for food, you're avoiding dangers, you're defending yourself against enemies, but your main goal is you're trying to make it to a lamp, because that's what moths do. This is definitely because I've just finished the game Hollow Knight and I've got bugs on the brain, not literally. So yeah, I'm very much in bug mode at the moment. So I've written the music for my imaginary game and I'm going to walk you through it and use this as a bit of a vector and conduit for these concepts. So the main section of my gameplay is this exploration loop, which I will play you now. And this is the part that plays when you're kind of fluttering around, not aimlessly, but you're exploring the world. So I'll play you that now. So that's our explore music. That is our mothy, fluttering music. So our main melody here I've got on the Ronroco, and yeah, I've just got that on the room preset, and I've got it doubled on the original cinematic soft piano. And then I've got this arpeggiated figure behind them, kind of going through, also on the Ronroco. And yeah, and then I've got a sort of variety of flourishes and background textures and variations. Some are from cells here, and then some are from Impressionism. And then I have some processed vocal layers from Labs here. I really like the Gaelic Voices library in Labs. And then I've got a little counter melody in some strings here. How do we write loops that don't get boring? How do we write loops that are seamless and they don't have a sort of obvious start and end? So the first and most obvious thing is write a long loop. The longer the loop, the less obvious it is that it's a loop. This is quite a short one because it's demonstrative. This one I've written here isn't so long. It's about a minute long and just uses this single melodic motif that repeats. But the main magic and trickery happens when you bounce to audio. So I bounced this to audio here. And what I've done is I've bounced it with a little tail. So I've not bounced within this loop. I just extended it out a bit, bounced that. And then what this gives you is this little tail section, which you can snip off here, put on a separate track and just drag to the start of your loop. And what this does is it adds a kind of continuity when you're, so I'll play it to you now. So it's so subtle, but what it does is it just, the lingering tail is just sitting behind everything and just like basically smoothing and smudging out the edge of your loop. Now, if you want to get really granular with that, you can, this is just the whole bounce for this section, but you could bounce out the stems and then do it for each stem and, have a slightly different length of tail and fade out and get really granular. So that's the main thing. So just a quick note on DAWs. I personally, when I'm writing for game music, I love working in Ableton. I think because it was designed for real-time performance and designed with loops in mind, it happens to be just incredibly intuitive for this kind of like modular adaptive composition. And game music, I found just to be like a really accidentally good fit for it. Obviously, every DAW will work great and every DAW has features that makes it stronger or less strong for games, but yeah, this is how I like to work. So let's talk about horizontal layering. Horizontal layering. Don't put that in. I don't know why I sung that. So the first thing that happens in our game is our moth hatches from the cocoon, and we watch that happen on screen. I don't think it's an interactive moment, but it has a musical stinger attached to it. And then we are going to horizontally transition into our exploration loop. Horizontally here meaning the sections are just linearly going one to the other. And then our exploration loop is going to transition into a gameplay stinger that we're going to talk about in a second. So let's listen to this transition. So you can hear how they kind of mold into each other. And then after our moth has been fluttering around for a while, exploring the world, they come across an enemy. A spider lurking in a web somewhere, trying to trap them. And yeah, for the record, I actually really love spiders. I just needed to pick a bug, an enemy bug, and I thought moths probably aren't great pals with spiders. So there is a musical stinger to mark this moment too. So I'll play the transition into that. Okay, so how does this work behind the scenes? How does this implementation work? And how would this work? How would we set this up to sort of horizontally transition nicely into each other? So in game music, there are two main ways of working. The first one is that it will be implemented directly in the game engine. The game engine is essentially the software that the game is being constructed in. It's the sort of virtual world that is being used to build the game. So you might have heard of Unreal Engine or Unity. These are two hugely popular game engines, and lots of very famous games were built in them. And so they might be implemented using code in the game engine, or it might be using a sort of more visual modular system. So for example, Unreal Engine has something called Blueprints, which is its own kind of bespoke visual no-code system for actually doing lots of different things, but one of them is implementing audio. And it's these kind of modular building blocks that you can connect together with nodes, and that's a way of working with audio and audio implementation. The other way is using something called middleware, which is usually a code-free way of building complex audio behaviors and setting up more sort of musical and more audio-focused behaviors, which then will speak to the engine. So it's basically just giving you this middleman with a lot more kind of customizable audio options, and then letting it talk to the game engine. So it hooks into Unreal or it hooks into Unity and tells Unity or Unreal what you want to happen. By the way, you might have heard of WYs, or Fmod. Those are some of the popular ones. So yeah, we'd create our audio event in there, we'd put our file in there and sculpt it how we want, and then we would link it in there to an object in-game, in this case, the spider. And there are so many different ways that these audio events can be triggered in-game. So it could be based on your proximity to the spider. It could be the moment the spider appears in your field of vision. It could be when you touch the spider web. It could be when you touch the spider. It's endless. There are so many different options. All of these things generally would be set up on the dev side. So if you're composing for a game, the developer is doing all of this. But as the composer, you might be told how the music's going to trigger in game, and you might be told a little bit about the implementation, or maybe not. But if you are, it gives you the chance to write in a way that best supports the implementation and delivers the most impact. I think it's always helpful to know a little bit what's going on. So, for example, in Wise, you can set up detailed transition rules, and these let you kind of control very precisely how music horizontally layers and transitions. So if we wanted the spider stinger to play the exact moment that the spider appears on the screen, we might tell Wise, finish the current beat and then trigger the stinger, as opposed to finish the current bar and then trigger the stinger. We'd want to make sure that the music is going to trigger musically, so on the grid, so on the beat, but very quickly, so literally next beat. Or maybe we deliberately don't want it to trigger musically. Maybe we want it to trigger immediately, and you can set that too. The main point is middleware lets you be incredibly musical about your choices rather than letting software limitations dictate your choices. It lets you make the music exactly how you want it. Another really nice thing I think about Ableton is that you can audition your transition rules. So you can audition your middleware transition rules before bouncing out and getting into the middleware using markers in Ableton. So it's not a perfect replica, but it's really handy for testing out how sections might sound in succession and how things might sound with different quantization settings flowing into each other. So if you're using section markers like I am here, so you've got your combat section marker, your gameplay stinger, you can go up to your global quantization settings here and match them in a way to what the transition rule might be, or what you're told that it might be. So if you know it's going to be a really quick, sudden change, you might set it to a 16th note and then just practice that. Yeah, so you can sort of audition how it might sound. So it's pretty cool, and it's a great way to give you a real sense of how things might play out in the game. Or, if it's going to be a longer one, we'll give it a bar. So yeah, it just gives you a sense of how things might play out before you get too deep into the technical side of things. So obviously, middleware lets you audition these things too before you get into the engine. I see this as a step before. So before you've even bounced anything out, you can audition how it sounds in the DAW. So in my game, we're entering this combat loop pretty much immediately. We're not going to have a very long transition. We're going to go straight into this combat loop, which kind of neatly leads us to my next concept, which is vertical layering. So I'll play this little sequence. I'll play us from the stinger into the combat loop. So what I just played you in my combat loop is the full loop with all of my layers stacked on top of each other. But in reality, this is actually 4 different layers that I have written. So I've got layer 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And I have created it like this. So essentially you can build them in, like build things up or reduce it down in intensity. And in Ableton, I'm using folders here to group my layers together. And this kind of is quite handy for like batch processing, and then I just bounce each of these folders out as a layer, and then it can be then implemented as layers. So I've sort of written here so that everything kind of works in isolation but in combination. So when you're writing for games, it adds like a dimensionality that you have to think about, because you're thinking now about how things are like layering and overlapping in different scenarios. So for example, in layer 1, I've got this little percussion loop. It's like our drums. You could drop down to that or remove it from the mix to change things up. This is layer 2. And I've got here just like various kind of like Ronroco. So I've got this open string figure, and then I've got just this like repeated plucking note, and then I've got this little like counter melody, and then I've got this nice labs string. Kind of nice, like kind of irregular kind of pedal note going under it. So this layer feels very kind of stringy and organic. And then on my third layer, I've got clarinet and strings playing this kind of like cheeky counter melody, and then halfway through things build up a bit, and this is just some really nice sounds from BBC SO and some more labs. Then in layer 4 I've got, I'll play from the start. So this one's the sparsest of all the layers. And I've just got this little clarinet thing. And then I've got those ascending kind of melodies, and some kind of sweet but slightly weird vocals underneath. Yeah, so in terms of like instrumentation and characterization, in my world and in my game, the spider is very much a clarinet. So there's a lot of clarinet in this combat loop. Kind of very like, kind of cheeky, menacing clarinet. Yeah, it's not like a super high stakes serious fight, but yeah, I wanted, I think the clarinet kind of like perfectly achieves that. So I'll play that up again. So how this might sound, bringing stuff in and out. Check out the drums. So, of course, when you defeat the spider, because you're amazing at this game and you've played it loads, I have created a little victory stinger, which I'll play now. Yay, you won. And maybe that's like, you see a lamp or something. But yeah, that's another moment for a kind of horizontal implementation. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about what makes a good game score and writing effective music for games. Yeah, and what sets game music apart, really. So just like film music, you're sculpting a strong musical identity that's coming from more than just melody and more than just tune. It's, you're creating a sonic world, just like in film, inseparable from the game's visual style, the narrative, the mechanics, the emotional tone, and, it feels like it really belongs to that world and sits in that world. And ideally, the game just wouldn't be the same without it, So if you think of The Last of Us, for example, Gustavo uses the Ronroco in this kind of like raw, sparse, beautiful way with his melodies that kind of like instantly place you in that world. And, just talking about it, I can hear the melody that he uses in the main theme. It's so memorable and it's so evocative, and the sound is such an important part of the storytelling. Or take Hollow Knight, which I was talking about earlier, which is a game with zero dialogue or zero real dialogue. It's just a lot of really cute bug noises. And the music is so important and contributes so much to the change in player feel and player experience between the different biomes and sections of the world. A lot of the game, it's a Metroidvania, so a lot of the game is about discovering these different worlds and, yeah, kind of like unearthing the story, and the music evolves with you. And then you have games like Journey, which use very dynamic scores and this like rich evolving orchestration that really matches the emotional arc of the player's journey, literally, from the start to the finish. But I think the best game soundtracks have this like intentionality about them. They make these bold choices and they really commit to them. So I'm going to play the whole thing through now, so you can hear what it sounds like. And I want you to imagine the gameplay and imagine the little moth fluttering along. So here we go. So we have covered a lot. We've talked about what sets game music apart from film scoring. We've talked about writing loops and sculpting loops to make them sound lovely. We've talked about implementation and what that is and how it works. We've talked about the concepts of horizontal and vertical implementation and writing and how to write for those. And we've seen and heard how the Ronroco sounds in this context, in this slightly fantastical, whimsical gameplay context. So yeah, I hope this inspires you to go check it out, write some game music and have a go at, writing some loops and delving deep into the world of game music. I have really enjoyed playing with this instrument and showing you everything, and also creating an imaginary moth game. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching and listening. See you next time.